Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Good evening, edu folk. How are we doing? How's things? Gosh, what a day. I mean, despite the fact I think it's approaching 2 decades since I took my GCSEs, I still feel absolutely sick every year, as I'm sure anyone who has children, knows children, has anybody linked to any kind of education at the moment. I can just see Brent's coming in. He is listening to me already. So today, of course, is a big day with plenty to talk about, plenty to discuss. But before we get cracking with proceedings, I just want to remind you, today of all days, I'm afraid, but might as well, Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French and German Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the need of all learners, regardless of their background or their ability or reason for studying. And this is all rooted in language learning. So yes, already thinking ahead to next year. If you want to know more about these GCSEs, then you can go to go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Brent, who I know is very eagerly ready and raring to get going. So over to you, my friend. How are you doing?
Emotionally drained. Like many others last night, I didn't sleep. I always have that kind of, I'm a bit like the football manager who kicks every ball on the football pitch. I'm one of those. And it's always really, really, people talk about getting 6 weeks holidays, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
You teachers get 6 weeks holidays. They don't understand that, halfway through your holidays, you go through this, which I can only describe as the Love Actually moment, that lovely scene at the end of Love Actually, when you have those moments of pure, unadulterated human emotion.
Of course.
And you have, the agony and the ecstasy. It can only be described pretty much like the Mary Earps moment last week. You have, while watching the football, you have that huge emotions of, somebody's done well, but then there's also, you look over your shoulder at somebody else who's not done so well, and it's bittersweet. I always find it kind of bittersweet, and there's always the story. And the thing is, at the All About board, I mean, I'll start with this, which I think it sums up how I always feel about it. And it's the London Underground All About board, which is always full of great little philosophical tidbits and humour. And it says, GCSEs, we all know, and many of you have been feeling nervous and don't deserve to feel like this. Many of you have had trouble sleeping the night before. Congratulations if you got what you wanted. But if you didn't, please try not to worry. Whatever your grades, you're worth 1,000,000 times more. And I thought, oh yeah, that's absolutely nailed on. Funny, I've seen that perpetuated in the media a little bit of, the exams are important, but when it comes down to it, they're individual children, and there's a story, an educational story, where some of them have done well at this time, but maybe they had, a different journey when they were younger. And I was reading all sorts of great, individual stories of children who are migrants who've come over and they're doing their GCSEs in hotel rooms, and children who've survived cancers, and they've got their exam results. And we all know individual kids that I've taught today, there was a story behind some of them. I had one of my 2 girls with me today this morning, and I took them in, hid them in my classroom while I was doing all the statistics and numbers. And I have that, right, let's go see the kids. Let's go see the envelopes handed out, because I always look forward to that day. I look forward to it. But I felt bad this morning because I was nervous. I was more nervous than I normally would be, because I got that feeling of, we're being told the exam grades are going to be pulled down. And I didn't have a normal kind of, I normally get more excited. I find myself feeling a glass half empty last night, dreading the exam results day, dreading the questions. And that's not normally me after 20 years of teaching. That's the first time I've probably had that feeling of dread, because I normally look forward to seeing the exam results, because the mood music was, this is going back to pre-pandemic levels.
I was going to ask you, Brent, just kind of because, I mean, I've definitely seen this sort of, there's been an emotional spectrum, of course, all across Twitter, but we still are, and I always refer to it as the COVID hangover, which I probably shouldn't, but it's still very much part of, what's happening today, isn't it? It hasn't just things haven't gone back to normal, have they? There's still a huge impact and a
No.
huge lasting impact from what has gone on in the last few years.
Absolutely. Anecdotally, on my own, going through individual students, I have 37 students over 2 classes. And the first thing I do is I go out, greet the kids, and have those moments, see the parents, shake hands, and a couple of hugs. I've got a jellyfish given to me. One of my absolute quirky students. She's amazing, absolutely high flying student. But yeah, it just basically needs to be told how brilliant she is. But always is hard on herself. Well, the one that you give the exam back to, the mock exam back to, and she looks for the one question she got wrong, and you're going, what about the 25 others you did well? And but she knitted these little baby jellyfish in crochet. So what would you do that for? She says, well, the last 2 days, this is what she's been doing with all her nervous energy. She's been knitting, and she gave a couple of them to my two children. So and it's just those type of things where you think what we put our children through. It's horrible. Attendance is. I'll go through the statistics in a couple of minutes. Attendance is not right. We've ghosted children. The disadvantaged versus the advantaged. We're not back to normal. And then there's this humdinger. Why is Northern Ireland exam grades? This is the first thing ever in Northern Ireland's history that they've won something. Good luck to them. But why are Northern Ireland's exam grades 20% better than England's? What? Better than London's? That's not right. How come children in Wales were getting help, but children in England don't get help? I mean, we have an unfair system, and then we have parts of the United Kingdom at different stages giving help, and then parts of the United Kingdom not even giving 1 to 9; they're giving A and Bs. So we have a very confusing system, and a very confusing system. What happens next when it comes to resits and it comes to um, um, courses with what are T levels? So it's a very confusing thing this morning. Even when I looked at the exam grades for my children, I was asking myself the question: have they done well? How have I done? How have they done well? It's very, we have to see the value added, and you get all these Fisher Family Trust, you get all the data being crunched. Kind of takes the joy out of it, because I went in kind of seeing individual students on a natural high, saw some fantastic results, and then when I went into my room and started crunching the numbers and looking on the spreadsheets, my heart started to sink. And then I looked at grade boundaries, and I saw that I had three students, 3 out of my 37 students are 1 mark off a grade boundary. And those are significant grade boundaries. We're talking 3 to 4 and 4 to 5. And for 3 to 4, that's pass to fail. So I now have to go through and get those scripts marked and go through the process. So I've already been in contact with one of the parents. They emailed me and said, look, we just noticed that. Because that's the other thing. The students could see how far off they were on the grade boundaries, because they got that with their GCSEs. They got their grade, and they also were told, what the number they got as well was. So that was interesting conversations of, well, what do we do? What do we do now? And again, having conversations across the Twitter sphere today, there's a lot of questions to be asked, of which we built on last week. We had this discussion last week about A levels, about moderation, about the quality assurance, about the accuracy of the grades themselves, and the lack of oversight. So we have a very strange exam system that, I'll be honest with you, I think Jeff Barton summed it up this morning very well for me. It was designed in the 1980s. You said it's been 2 decades since you've done yours. It's 3 decades since I've done mine. It's 29, nearly 30 years since I had my GCSEs. It shouldn't be the case that I should be still using the same sort of system that I was taught to, and I'm, practically mid to near the end of my teaching career. The world's moved on. GCSEs should have evolved by now. We shouldn't be using them any longer. And this idea of going back to 2019 as if 2019 was halcyon days of the good old days, as if 2019 was some sort of golden era before a pandemic, that's not good enough, because it wasn't right then. But to go back and say, oh, we're going back to 2019 because then things were okay in 2019. No, they weren't. There was a massive gap in attainment between boys and girls. There's a massive gap in regions. And we know that GCSEs are not always going to predict and get the best out of some pupils. So I think there's a missed opportunity. I'm really disappointed. I thought, again, during the COVID crisis, that what would come out of the whole thing of the rogue algorithm, and what would come out of the way that the system was flawed and exposed as flawed as it was, I thought that was the opportunity, and maybe I'm naive and optimistic and idealistic to believe that the guys in charge would have saw how bad. I mean, he's not there any longer, the fireplace salesman who was our education secretary, who used to have a whip on his desk. But here's the thing: I would have thought that they saw that straight off and thought, this isn't working. It's taken until January this year to call an inquiry into the hundreds of thousands of children who are missing from education. I mean, it's taken to January this year to do that. And you think, well, we've been saying that since pretty much the start of the pandemic. We've lost a significant proportion of children, and attendance has dropped off. I mean, I've got some of the attendance figures, which I'll go through as well. So that's the headline figure of a very confusing system. The very confusing sort of as to what is good or bad any longer. I think the whole system's starting to get to the point where what actually is it good for? Is are these GCSEs just good for getting yourself into the next stage of your qualifications? And for a lot, that will be A levels. Um, but if it's T levels, we saw last week the 33% dropout on T levels. So there isn't that security of what do your GCSEs get. And I'm sure we had in the conversation this morning with anybody who on the media saying nobody will ask you what your GCSEs are in 10 years' time. But are we at that stage where, all it is GCSEs are just a means to an end to get you to the next stage of your educational career? If that's fine, then why do we sit GCSEs? Why don't we do an aptitude test like they do SATs in America? Why do we put our children through these horrible exams which break some? They do. They just absolutely break some children. It's an endurance test, and then judge the quality of teachers based on that. And that gives me a chance to have a shout out to Tom's show on Monday night, which was absolutely exceptional. Really good show, very deep and intellectual. One of those things you get in Teachers Talk Radio sometimes, and you go, wow, I'm going to listen back to that. And I think Tom even said that with a pen and piece of paper. And there was some fantastic ideas of actually DNA. Who knew that your genetics could have an impact? Of course it does on your educational attainment. Well, of course it does. That's so obvious that we've probably overlooked that. And Tom was asking, what effect does a teacher have? And I think the great Dylan Williams was suggesting it can make a difference up to half a grade. Well, that's all very well, but when they've shifted my history papers by 8% today, that's great and fantastic. That mathematics, they were telling me that there was 22 marks between the grade boundaries year on year. And it's not fair when you're having to be the face of this when you're talking to parents and they go, "What does 5 mean?" And you're thinking, "Well, 5 means this in England. It doesn't mean this in Scotland. That doesn't mean anything in Northern Ireland." And you're like, "Well, how confusing it must be for some parents." I don't think everybody understands the system, and even some people in the examination system don't understand the examination system. So I think the time has come, and I'm going to add my voice to it, like Jeff Barton, like Gary Neville said last week about the A levels. They are archaic, they're ancient, and it is time. I think the union's going to have to get it pushier on this. It's time for educational reform when it comes to testing our children. It's just not producing any sorts of results. We saw this morning very difficult questions to Nick Gibb on BBC Breakfast, and we saw him on when he was doing the rounds. So he was sent out as a sacrificial lamb this morning, and he had his usual kind of pre-prepared stuff of, we have £5 billion worth of funding, and you're going, yeah, great, fantastic. £5 billion worth of funding, that's a drop in the ocean of what we need to catch up on COVID. By the way, it was 15 billion it was promised, and where is that 5 billion? And he was talking, oh yeah, we were closing the gap until COVID hit, and it's just set us back. And we're closing what gap? Closing the gap between what? The less affluent and disadvantaged students? No, you weren't. Academisation has failed. All the reforms of Gove have failed. The outcomes are quite clear that there is a massive disadvantage gap between regions and within regions and schools. There is a huge postcode lottery and a massive disadvantage gap and a variation even within the greater United Kingdom. Our education system is, for want of a better word, stagnant in comparison to Estonia, other parts of the world, who have a better, I think, philosophy of what the purpose of education is. I think we're losing sight of it, and that's where the exam results are important, and getting the qualifications are important, but to a certain extent. I had a conversation with a student today, and he got a 4 from me. He was predicted a 7. Now, somebody might come in and say to me, "Oh, that student's 3 grades below. You're a terrible teacher." But the story behind that's quite simple. That student was getting one-to-one tuition for myself after school. And literally on the back of myself, I just said, "This kid's struggling. I want to see it. Come in after school, have a cup of tea with me, sit down." And it became a little bit of a thing, and a couple of other students joined in as well. And he got 9 in his maths. He got a 9 in his maths. He is now getting an apprenticeship with one of the leading manufacturers in the country. And I says, "Well, I walked up and I was expecting, oh God, I'm really sorry you only got a 4 in history." And I was expecting him to be disappointed and say, "I've let you down, sir." He goes, "I did all right, didn't I?" I'm going, "Yeah, are you happy with that?" "Do you know what, sir? Considering where I was last year and this time last year, I am more than happy with that." And then he looked straight down and he went, "Look, I got my 9. That's really important. And I'm naturally good at a 9. And his mum came over and says, "Thanks for all the work you've done. Thanks for everything. You helped him out." It's like, "Well, what?" I just give him revision timetables and make sure there was somebody there to talk to. Sometimes you just needed somebody to talk to. But here's what it comes down to: I'm going to have those data meetings, and whether I like it or whether I don't, I, as the subject teacher, am going to lose point whatever of a grade on my residuals. At the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I would have just liked you to have got the grade so I don't have to have that conversation. And that, again, is where I have this one side of me saying, I'm really proud of all the hard work I've done with that child. And that child will remember all the hard work that I've done for him. But at the other side of it, how I'm judged is, well, I failed. I failed because he didn't achieve in my subject. And I think that story, I think, gets replicated up and down the country about how we, as teachers, Tom alluded to it earlier on, about we fall upon our swords, we feel guilty, we feel as if we've let down. And I went through that emotional ringer today. So I'm mostly tired after that of searching my soul, going through every child and going, why did they do well? Why did they not do well? What was the key deciding factor? Going through every exam paper, started looking at my exam papers. Was it that paper? Was it this paper? Did I not prepare enough for that? I've started even drilling into exam questions. What was it this question? Because I want to know, because I want my students to do well. But then I felt bad about myself, thinking I've got caught into this thing and forgotten the key, most important thing. I didn't go into education to destroy children to get exam grades. I went into education to change outcomes. And I kind of went, as I went home, I thought to myself, go away. I use the Northern Irish vernacular. Go away and catch yourself on, Poland, because you've made a difference to those children. And the ones that sought me out and said, "Look, thanks for your grades. I got 8s and 9s and stuff." The ones that did well were honest with me and said, "I worked hard for that." Others, sometimes they got what they deserved. They put in what they got back out. And there's just a handful where I look and think, "Oh, you just what's going wrong there?" But that's where we are with the system. I don't think it's fair. So I'm really looking forward to hearing some of your stories. That's pretty much the story I'm gonna say today. Um, and I don't want to, as Lucy says, I can talk for an hour and a half about everything. I don't want to do that. I want to hear as much as possible from as many of you as possible on the story of the day. I want to explore the drill into the data, the disadvantage, the advantage, the regional variations, the boy and girl gap as well. I want to have a look at that. I want to look at the attendance issues, the attendance figures, and the connection between those and obviously what's happening with the ghost children, as mentioned. I want to have a look again at this idea of grade deflation. Is it fair to grade? It's the only thing this government ever actually wants to deflate. Apart from inflation, of course, but they always want growth. It's funny that we want economic growth, economic growth, economic growth. What is wrong with our children getting better? I don't get this philosophy about why should we be pulling our children down. I just don't get this logic of surely our children year on year should be making vast improvements. Surely the grades they're getting should be vastly improving because the quality of teaching, I'm going to be honest with you, my colleagues, I've never worked as hard, and I know that a lot of you feel exactly the same way I do. We've never worked as hard in education to get these outcomes, and we have really upped our game in brain physiology. Look, just listen to Teacher Talk Radio. Here we have a radio station dedicated to getting better at our craft. So we are at top of our game. I don't think we as a generation of teachers in the UK or could do more. In fact, a lot of people are leaving the profession because they feel as if, how much more can you squeeze out of us as a profession? I don't think there's much more to be squeezed. Because if we're squeezed anymore, there'll be people like me saying, I'm done with this. And I love this job. I love being a teacher. I loved lots of what happened today. That's the captain, my captain moments that sustain you throughout the year. Those horrible days that you have when you think, those moments when you see those children open those exam results and you see the smiles on their faces. It's Christmas time. It really is Christmas when you've got children, and you know if you're a parent that feeling you get when your children open up their Christmas present is very similar to watching a child open up their exam results, and you see that look in their faces, and you just go, "Wow, yes!" And it's brilliant to be part of that. It's absolutely amazing to be part of that.
Brent, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Fantastic. Adam's
Oh,
alive. I
I,
just wanted to call
he
him
made
out
it.
that he was being held captive
no,
for
no,
some reason and you'd taken his
it's
phone.
always difficult to know
I'm
when
glad
to
to hear that
interrupt.
Adam's alive.
I was just going to do a quick reminder. Sorry, I'm in the middle of nowhere up in the northeast at the minute. I'm just trying to do my best to get a signal. But I thought it might be. Normally at this point, I give Brent a finger in the kidneys for the sponsors. So I thought you could
Oh,
just have a
yes.
look at
Brilliant.
the Pearson's MFL.
Oh, yeah,
Why are you there?
absolutely. Well, there's actually a lead into. No, let me do this. There's a
But
lead into the
I just thought it'd be an opportunity just for everyone to kind of catch up on what you said already, and give people an opportunity to kind of maybe put their hand up ready, and we'll queue some people up ready to speak, and get their thoughts on today whilst you're going through the sponsor.
Yes. Well, there is a lead into the sponsor. Entries in Spanish jumped up by 11.3%, and they reckon that it's got to do with summer holiday habits. I don't think it is that. I actually think it's to do with language teachers realizing Spanish is a language that is more on the up, i.e., more useful in the United States of America. I've noticed that our school was mostly predominantly French speaking, and there is a definite transition towards Spanish. But they suggest that Spanish is on track to overtake French as the most popular language GCSE.
That's really interesting. And I think the whole point about Pearson MFL's new GCSEs from 2024 is that you don't need to have gone on holiday to Malaga or to Bordeaux or to Montpellier or to Cadiz if you want to do French or Spanish or German, even as a GCSE, because the whole point about the new Pearson MFL GCSEs is that they're transparent and they are accessible, and they're rooted in learned language knowledge, and you don't have to have gone on a ski holiday to complete your speaking assessment, because it's designed to be accessible to all students regardless of their background or their reason for studying. And that's what's so great about these new Pearson NFL GCSEs that are coming in.
Which is our sponsor, which is on point, because there we have a rise in modern foreign languages. On the other side of it, there's an interesting sort of take on the subjects that are least popular. Entries of music's gone down. So music, the arts subjects have gone down. Numbers of students taking Chinese has doubled since 2019. And while those taking Russian as GCSE has increased by 53%.
That's got to be linked with resources, hasn't it?
Well, I think also it's got to be linked to the refugee situation with regards the number of children coming in from the Ukraine. So I'd say that increase, and quite a few of them are Russian speakers rather than Ukrainian. And I found that out when I had a Ukrainian refugee. Well, he's a fantastic individual, and I put up on my PowerPoint the subtitles, which I've started to do. Now I put subtitles on my PowerPoint so kids can follow. Because probably like 50% of the kids these days actually watch a movie with subtitles on, so they just got so used to that. But I had to put Ukrainian on, and he sort of the next lesson he's like, "Why, sir, if you put Ukrainian?" And I went, "You speak Ukrainian?" No, I speak Russian. So it was an interesting insight into that, and that's why probably our Russian's gone up. But that's the point about GCSEs have got to evolve, which is why our sponsor is a GCSE, which is evolving to meet the needs of our learners, and it's good to see that. And then that's obviously more than foreign languages are. They're not just languages; they're modern foreign languages. And the idea of languages are, you learn your own language. I mean, I always get students say to me, "What's the point in learning French? I'm never going to live in France." Well, you translate that language into your own language, which helps again your command of your own language. So that's Pearson's Modern Foreign Language 2024, which is ready to go, and our sponsor. So, Adam,
Yeah, just one of the interesting things. We laughed last week, obviously, with all the differences across the country in different exam boards, everything else. We kind of went away going, what is the big picture going to be like this Thursday? One of the things that I saw today, which I never knew, maybe you can shed some light on this. In Northern Ireland, why do they have like a C star? I noticed that there's like a middle grade, an extra kind of grading within that boundary.
I
So
don't.
you can get like a C
It's
star.
29 years since I did my GCSEs in Northern Ireland, and I'm 20 years teaching in England. So,
Yeah,
a lot's changed back there. But
yeah,
they still use grades.
yeah.
They still use grades. I remember actually I was the first year in Northern Ireland to actually have stars in the mid 90s. And incidentally, the only one I got was in my art. Was
Mm.
art star, yeah, who knew. But yeah, there's a very different education system. You've got to factor in they have a transference exam, which is the equivalent of the 11 plus. They have
Okay.
grammar schools,
Yeah.
which are based upon ability, not ability to pay. The grammar
Mm.
schools are still weighted towards the two dominant religions. So you have
Yeah.
Catholic grammar schools, Protestant grammar schools. There is a lot more integrated education, and that's growing. But they're still dominated by the socio-political situation in Northern Ireland.
It's really
But
interesting because one of the things as well that came out, Sutton Trust have done some fantastic analysis straight away today, and one of the things that they posted was how far grammar schools are above both independent schools and way above, obviously, comprehensive schools in today's results again. And I thought that was an interesting kind of viewpoint. Is kind of grammar schools don't seem to be affected by any of this kind of grade reduction. Their grading seems to be fairly flat across the last couple of years. So I think that I don't know if that's worth just looking at later. But we also mentioned last week about this big rise in the pluses in London. And then obviously across the middle of the country, you have that big reduction from grades in from 2019 again. So I thought that they were the two bits that I picked out of the Sutton Trust data today, that where these differences are starting to come through. Really interesting this time in the Northeast. We spent a lot of time talking to someone in the Northeast last Thursday around A levels. Is that actually they were a lot further down in the Northeast. Today they were just slightly up. I think it was 1.3% up on 2019, and London was at plus two. So I don't know why the northeast has managed to jump up a little bit, but across the middle of the country, it's looking pretty desperate. I don't know where if you can call it the red wall or that kind of left behind regions.
I
You
think
know,
there is. I mean, Labour's shadow ministers basically put the knife in by saying that they're proof that the government's levelling up agendas failed. The political party aims to reduce imbalances between areas and social groups in the UK, including schools. Not don't say how they're going to do it, but they say they are. Children in disadvantaged communities aren't going to do as well as children in more affluent areas. Which actually Nick Gibb himself, to his credit, he had a very awkward interview this morning on BBC Breakfast. It was cringeable. And he got quite riled up when the BBC interviewer was like, "Look, the advantage and disadvantage gap has widened. You've had a chance to
yeah,
close that." And he was like, "Well, no, 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 no." And in fact, what he did say was, "I've actually got it here." He suggested that they were closing the gap, and they had started to close the gap, but then COVID came along, and that put pay to it. And there was that was the narrative that was being spun this morning. We've given 5 billion quids towards catch up. We have free schools being open, and you saw that idea. He even quoted Michaela and went, "Oh, it can be done. It can be done. Here's a school in London." And I'm going, "Here it comes. Here it comes. Yay! There it is, Michaela." And don't get me wrong, they are fantastic. I'm not having a go at how successful that
yeah. I mean,
school
we
is.
don't want to do that,
But
do we? We don't want to kind of diss the London schools here. I mean,
no,
all schools should be getting a rise.
yeah.
So the question is, what is happening in London that's clearly not happening in the East Midlands, the West Midlands, the
What's
Manchester
happening in
area?
Northern Ireland,
Yeah, yeah.
and what's happening in Wales as
Mm.
well. And we know the answer to that is going to be is that they're in a different system. Their children had got more help. They were given more help. It's as simple as that. English children were disadvantaged. So English children were disadvantaged, and you've got the most disadvantaged in England.
It's
Children.
more nuanced than that because it's students in the out of London and not in the northeast, who are the biggest disadvantaged. So what is going on in those regions that's given those children such a big impact? Is it? I mean, there's been a lot of research I've been reading over the last couple of days, just still on long COVID. Are some children in certain regions just more? Are they still off? Are they still poorly? Are they just not accessing education in those regions?
Yeah.
Is there something kind of? I think we really need to understand, especially as we teach in the Midlands, what is going on in the Midlands to have this persistent problem all the time. We know, for example, don't we, because we've worked in the Nottinghamshire area, that's always, and Derbyshire area has performed particularly poorly over the last, 10 years.
Lack of
Um,
funding, lack
yeah,
of cultural capital, lack of drive, motivation. There's a whole load of socioeconomic
yeah,
statistics in that.
but
But going back to your
but
attendance thing,
sorry, yeah.
yeah, absence is the most pronounced among pupils from poorest households. Who
Mhm.
knew? Among those eligible free school meals, 1 in 7, 13.6%, was absent for any given day during the first term of the school year, almost twice the rate among their peers, and up from 9.2% in autumn. So we have children on free school meals are more likely to be absent. We've seen an absolute huge growth in all authorised absences to 15.4 million days of unauthorised absence. We have late holiday, other authorised. So we have a whole group of children out there who just not turning up for school. So that's, we're seeing that situation where we've got a whole sort of situation where we have children who just aren't at school. We have illness at 12.6 million days, other 2.7. We've got 1.2 million days lost with exclusion. But all of this is leading to a lack of attendance. Now, our GCSEs, you take something like my history GCSE, the amount of content I have of these GCSEs, you miss days. It's a bit like, back in the days of university, you missed one lecture and you come to the lecture afterwards, you're thinking, what's going on here? Did I miss something important? Then you don't bother going to the next one after with that because you think, I'm already behind. And you just go write your essay and hopefully try and get yourself over the line. That was my first year at university. That's how these children probably feel. Once children start going off school, it's hard to get them back in. We've got a lot of children missing, those ghost children, and they are disproportionately impacted in correct areas where there is deprivation. And you're correct, long COVID and COVID rates were higher in more deprived areas. So put the whole thing together. You have illness, you've got the higher long COVID rates. Of course, schools which are less well funded would have had more less ventilation. I'm sure there is going to be people out there, and this is for the academics out there, going to crunch the numbers and come
Yeah.
up with something that's going to come along the lines and say, if you were in a disadvantaged area, you are more likely to suffer from COVID. Fact. If you are more of an ethnic minority, you are more likely to live in a disadvantaged area. Therefore, you're more likely to suffer from COVID. That's what the whole Black Lives Matter thing is about. You are more likely, therefore, to not do as. And there are always outliers to that, and parts of London are outliers to that. But when you start getting into the deindustrialized areas of the Midlands, which don't have the heavy industry they used to have, those sink housing estate schools, it's really tough. It really is, because you're fighting against a lot of things. And I think behavior comes into it, attitude comes into it. Um, I think also that drive and motivation of, sure, it's only GCSEs. Ah, well, you'll be okay. And I think that's starting to filter into society now. Don't worry if you don't get your GCSEs. I know a billionaire who didn't get them. I'm noticing more of those conversations of, so don't worry, you'll be okay. It's strange to see that
Yeah.
flippancy that's
Well, it's
filtering
not.
in.
It's not that. As you remember in England that it's compulsory now to get your maths and English. So there's going to be a heavy impact there on retakes next year.
Yeah,
And especially if those children who have been disaffected by school have then chosen a college place with a vocational course that better suits their outcomes, are going to go back around this merry-go-round of research next year. And is there a resource there, even the maths teachers and English teachers, to do that?
yeah.
Because that's going to be even a bigger impact now those students have dropped off the bottom.
And here again, heads warn disadvantaged pupils would be hard at Hesperi's sits. Who knew? Schools across England are expecting a large number of students will require to retake their GCSE English and Maths as 40,000 more students were likely to fail. Pupils who remain in full-time education have not gained at least a level 4 equivalent to a lower C in English and Maths have to resit the subjects until they're 18. The numbers are likely to rise as GCSE grading returns to tougher pre-pandemic levels. School leaders and teacher unions have called on the government to revise the requirement, warning that pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds are expected to be worst affected. Kevin Courtney, the outgoing Joint Secretary of the National Education Union, forcing resits is demotivating for many students, and the low pass rate is a clear sign of a policy failure. So he's digging it in there. Educators know the weakness of the current system have suggested many alternatives. The government should think of changing this outdated policy. Analysis by the Guardian newspaper showed that by 2022, 75% of pupils taking GCSE Maths gained a 4 or above, while 77% gained a 4 or better in English. Applying the 2009 grade proportions would cause both pass rates to drop by 7 percentage points, so 37,000 more pupils would need to pass English and 25,000 more passing Maths. And again, there's the cost implications, the opportunity cost, and of course, you have, if they didn't get a first time round and they had a qualified teacher helping them, how is it going to be easier when they're on their own a little bit? That there's that aspect of you're
I'd have thought it'd be almost impossible. I mean, I don't really understand. I mean, like, especially if you have,
it's not like a driving test, is it?
Well, if you've taken a route that's maybe not even in education, I mean, it might be kind of almost like as an apprentice, mightn't it? Whereas you're with a centre that might keep you on in education, but you're not necessarily in a school or an education centre.
Yeah.
I don't know how just going through that is going to support. Amy's just been in touch, Brent, on the comments that says, and Amy, it'd be great if we could hear you tonight and see what you think. But what can be done to help bridge the gap in the northeast and London and the rest of the UK? Is it purely a resource issue? Is it more money? Is that what's required?
I mean, I come at this from a social science point of view as somebody who studied economic development. My actual original degree was economic development, and for me, I grew up in abject poverty with an unemployment rate of 45% during the Troubles, and I often reflect on how did I get out of that? Education. And one of the rescuing factors, we call it rescuing factors, was my parental attitude. My parents' attitude was one of, you will do well, son. You will not fail. And I look at some of the children who I do well with, and I look at their parents. It's today I had the conversations with some of their parents who were equivalent of my type of parents, were, driven, motivated, and attitudinally sort of wired into, I want my child to do well. I value education. I want my child, and sometimes actually those poor children are actually it's the tiger mom thing, isn't it? I mean, my own parents sometimes actually made mistakes of making me very competitive with my older brother. You must do well. You must do. I've got 24 cousins on my dad's side of the family. 22 out of 24 went to university from a working class family, and we were basically much set against each other, like in the burr pit of, your cousin's done well as exams. Yeah. But that competition, that competitiveness, that I'd almost say aggressive, parenting of, you will do well. School is important. My exam results were put on the mantelpiece in my grandmother's house and pride of place, because it meant something. And I think it has to come down to the value placed on education, how important it is to the child and the parents and the wider communities. And you cannot change those attitudes. No, you can't just flip a switch and expect people to then, grow that attitude, because
where does that come from? Does it come locally? I mean, obviously you work locally, don't you, your community?
Yeah.
Or is it a school's responsibility to go out into the local community and show how education can benefit everybody?
Well, it can, but here's the kicker. I turn around and I've seen it happen where I have one of my students today who is going to go to Cambridge. Her brother's at Cambridge, and that's pretty cool for a location in a school that we are.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: I know for a fact that she won't be staying around here. She'll get her degree, and it'll be London. It'll be Dubai. It'll be Singapore. She's already talking. A 15-year-old saying to me a couple of months ago, in one of my after-school sessions, where's your future? I'm learning languages for a reason, Mr. Poland. I'm getting out of here. And that's the problem. You have such a brain drain. I'm a classic example of the brain drain myself.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. You need to keep those young, enthusiastic, driven, and motivated people with that cultural capital. But where are they going to be drawn to? They're going to be down in the London or the Manchester, the London of the North. They're going to be motivated towards going in Scotland. They're going to be to Edinburgh, Glasgow. They're being pulled into those major metropolitan areas or even abroad. And that's what we're losing that as well. So a lot of schools do a good job of trying to educate children and then see them fly the nest, and that's okay. But they don't come back into the communities and then invest. And it's got to be investment. It's got to be. You have to have the outcome. You have to have employers out there where you say, gone are the days where there was a job for life. A lot of employment now is transient. And you say to your children, why should you work hard at school? For me, working hard at school was twofold. Working hard at school was a way to validate my self-worth of, like, I have done well. Here are my grades. This matters. I
Yeah.
matter. It also was a way for me to say, I want to get out of here, because I knew I was going to go travel the world and do things. That was one of my driving motivators behind it. Now, why aren't I living where I grew up? Because there just wasn't the opportunity. So if you want to level up,
Yeah.
you can educate your children, but you've got to
I mean,
give them something to stay for. You've got to invest in the wider community. You've got to have the confidence is the thing. There's
yeah,
just people who are told.
Cassandra just commented, Brand, that she completely agrees with you, and a lot of parents don't engage with children's education. We see it all the time, and it's the parents that you don't see at parents' evenings that don't turn up and then are not engaged. I kind of agree with what Cassandra's saying. However, I will say, kind of, you've got to remember that a lot of our children are working. I've got parents who are doing multiple jobs and work in the evening, and sometimes it's quite hard for them to kind of engage. And sometimes I know if you can take the time, I know it's a really difficult thing to work-life balance, to try and call them at another time. They do want to kind of engage, but they just find it difficult with their workload sometimes to get in. So I agree with the sentiment that it's often the hardest students to engage. It's also hard to engage their parents and wider family as well.
Well, the thing is, poverty is cyclical,
Yeah.
and attitudes are cyclical. And yes, you're right about schools. Schools can. It's that kind of captain my captain moment. We can be sometimes the rescuing factor,
Yeah.
and
Well,
that
I worked in the school opposite to you, and the
yeah
proudest thing that I had working there was what we had in our title, which was the community school. And I
yeah
was absolutely devastated when that became an academy, and the first thing that went out of that was the community bit.
community feel
And I
yeah
thought that was so heartbreaking, because it was purely it was open. I remember kind of as I left sometimes at 5, 6 o'clock, we had these the old age pensioners come in, and we used the workshops for their clock
yeah
making club.
yeah.
We obviously the sports things carried on a little bit, but it was around the clock community, people coming in and out from the community all the time,
But you see, the
and
exams that you were doing back in 2010s in that community college, which was a working class area, which still has a low level light industry going on in manufacturing. And I thought it was brilliant what that school did, because they
yeah.
were a technical based college that had less driven academically students, and you worked to your strengths. That produced, which I thought I admired what your school used to do, your old school used to do,
Yeah,
because
because we used to take people out to the farm. I mean, one of the heads of year owned a farm. Um,
engineering firms used to come in and recruit directly from your school.
that's right. Yeah, we literally pull them out. Yeah, it was almost like a scouting.
And it all went with academization,
That's
which,
right. Yeah,
and,
but
and that,
literally
and you were then
the
saying to
first thing
some
they did,
children,
Brent,
all of
was
a sudden,
take out the community bit.
yeah, but
So
then all of a sudden,
how do you outreach to people when you're literally like, if you think about what a school's become? If you look at that school, since I started in 2004. What I noticed was fences going up, gates going up, communities coming out the word. It's all saying to the outward community, stay away, don't engage, don't come in. We don't want you in. We want you away. We don't want you engaged in this. Visually, it looks like we don't want you to know.
and I also think that's one of the reasons where you see a lot of news stories now are very negative about school. I think a lot of people have lost affinity with their local schools,
That's right.
and now
Yeah.
they're more likely to ring into the local newspaper and say, my child is not getting this. And I noticed that I used to have more conversations with parents about, how can my child make progress? What level is my child working at? Now I'm getting, why have you given my child a punishment? Why does the color of their hair matter? Ooh, they want to do this, they want to do that. Why can't they do this? Why can't they do that? In other words, you're working against me. And it's like, I said to a parent once, I said, you understand, I'm like a doctor, right? And I'm giving medicine to your sick child, right? And I want them to get better. I want them to improve. My role here is like a doctor. I want your child to improve and get better. That's my altruistic view here. And you are rejecting my medicine and then double questioning my ability to be a dog. Fine. I'm going to go to my dentist next time and tell him how to drill teeth. If you want that, fine. Off you go. I'm going to my driving instructor, tell him how to drive instruct. I'm getting a bit fed up with this. I've been second guessed sometimes. I'm an academic professional educator, and I think a lot of us are just reaching that point where we just can't do anymore. Some of us, we're being hamstrung with educational policy, which is pulling in the wrong direction. And all the statistics and the data is showing that. And this idea of we were closing the gap until 2019 and COVID really put us back. I'm going to say it. That's just educational. Insert a swear word of choice. It's nonsense. We've not been closing the gap in the last couple of years. We've been pretty much doing what's the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. We've
right, yeah.
known for a generation that the type of exams we're giving our children. We have enough evidence from other countries. We have enough evidence from other parts of the United Kingdom. Hello.
Just
Why?
in terms of community involvement, Brent, Amy's just been in contact to say it comes from those members of staff that consistently work at putting on things like Macmillan Morning, coffee mornings, open up a second-hand clothes shop. But again, it's about pressures and resources, and it's hard to maintain. And this is the big kicker, Amy. I think you've made a really good point here. Has the goodwill gone out of teaching to stay on a Saturday morning or come in the evenings or do in the mornings to do those extra bits to actually
There's a hardening of attitude.
keep
There
that
has been,
community going?
yeah, there has been a hardening of attitude. I
Amy.
still do it. I had a conversation with another historian saying today how we get the history course finished. I stay behind after school. I do it because I choose to do it, but it has a knock-on effect. It means me coming home and sacrificing an hour of my time with my children in the evening sometimes. And my wife's had a serious conversation with me going like, well, we need you home. And I'm like, well, I'm at school doing what I'm doing for the kids who today, the ones that sought me out were the ones that stayed behind. During half term, I bring the kids in, we sit down, we have a couple of hours, I buy them a Domino's pizza, sorry, free sponsorship. And those, if I look at the correlation between the students who did well for me today, it is those that were invested because I'm building that relationship with them, and I have the relationship still with my school. But I'm a rare breed. I'm 20 years in the only school I've ever taught because it's my school, it's my community, and I'm a union rep because I will fight tooth and nail to protect my colleagues and protect the ethos of my school, which sometimes leads me into conflict with the trust stroke and also my head teacher. But we share the same visage. He's a good guy as well. He gets it. But it's really tough, and I understand why some people have just said, I can't do this any longer because we're being burnt out. We're trying to override outcomes in society which are way beyond our control. I have no control over child's attendance or their socioeconomic status. And like the Monday night sort of debate, I have no control over their genetics. What I do have control over is what I teach them, how I teach them, the manner of which I teach them. So the things within my control, I can do the best I can. And yes, I mean, we can only do so much with the resources we have, but it doesn't stop us as teachers feeling guilty and trying to get better and more because we care. Because we care and we're in the game because we care about helping young people, and it's frustrating when you feel that regardless of how you do, somebody way above you is just moving grade boundaries around to make a political point. Sorry, we have to take everything down by 9%. Sorry about that. You're just a sacrificial year. It's really, it's not fair. It's not fair. So, sponsors, let's have a little plug for our sponsors. Pearson's MFL, which is, of course, a GCSE, and that is up and running by 2024. So it's rooted in new knowledge and knowledge that it gives the kids the ability to, I suppose, navigate the modern world. So they've updated their GCSE, and of course that's ready to go as well. So it's Pearson's MFL. Modern Foreign Languages, GCSE specification ready to go from 2024. And as I said earlier, Modern Foreign Languages, especially like Spanish, are on the rise. And as quoted earlier, one of my students says, education, stroke, languages is getting me out of here. And if you look around at our Teachers Talk Radio, we do have lots of our hosts, including Lucy, who are abroad, and even lots of teachers who teach abroad, and even some of you guys who are listening in might also be listening in abroad. So I'd look forward to any of you, not just Adam, having a little chat, calling in. Amy, if you want to have a little chat and call in as well. Looking at some of my listeners I've got here, I've got some quality listeners. I've got Dan, I've got School Teacher UK, I've got Shan, English. We've got Danny, we've got the Stat Strangler. Well, that's good. I like the idea of strangling stats. I mean, because as much as I love stats, they can sometimes be a little soulless. We've the VAR Loyal. Let's see. We've got Tom in, with both Toms in. We've got Kyle Graham. I'd love to hear from you, Kyle, because we had a good little back and forth today about the grade boundaries, and also with the other Tom as well. So I'd be more than happy to hear from your insight as well, because I know you were crunching some numbers, especially about history. So history to history, and we had a good chat about how do we get the amount of content squeezed in. And I know I've seen when I've looked at my paper analysis, I've noticed that one of my papers was lower than the others, one element of it, and lo and behold, it was the element that I did last and rushed, and that's going to have to form the narrative of why did some children not do so well, and I'm going to have to then explain, well, this is the choice I made. I left this unit to the last because it was a more straightforward unit, and maybe the children interleaving it didn't get as many opportunities. They didn't do a mock exam in that unit. And then my logic was it was a crossed over with English and Shakespeare, so it was a unit on Elizabeth. So I felt that actually I could use the knowledge they acquired from another core subject to make my teaching of it a lot more efficient and a lot quicker. But then I sacrificed the amount of times that they would actually study the unit in the hope that it was fresh near the end. It didn't work out. For some of the students, it was obvious that, the ones that one time they had to learn it probably needed maybe 2 or 3 times. But that's again the choices you make as a teacher. Sometimes you've got to then account for that and say, this is the gamble. And it is a little bit of a gamble, isn't it? It's a bit of a gamble sometimes that you take to kind of, play the game, guess the questions, organize your units, allocate your time. But on the allocation of time, and I'm going to contradict myself as a union rep, we did have strikes in there. They did have an impact. How much impact, we'll never know. We had the COVID situation. These students were year 8 and year 9. We've had changes in behaviour. We've had, I suppose, a very different situation in society to deal with. Even the recruitment crisis. How many specialists are now not teaching subjects that, how many non-specialists are teaching subjects they shouldn't be teaching, and what impact does that have on exam grades? It was interesting seeing music declining. I know that one of the most successful subjects in our school was actually music, but the class size was one of the smallest options. And if you are a trust looking at that, you're saying to yourself, well, why are we running an option? We've only got a handful of kids in. Even though it was one of the most successful options, I felt my numbers, because of the EBAC in history and geography, have been pulled up, which then leads me to a situation where I'm teaching children who I normally may not have taught history or geography to. And it leads to conversations of, well, how good is your maths? Well, should you be taking geography at GCSE if your maths isn't? And how good is your English? Should you be taking history? And I've never done that, because I'll take any student as long as they're willing to learn. But this has impacts when you are being engineered at option level to take subjects in order to create data, in order to, and you think, well, why are we doing this? We're doing this because the will of Ofsted is that you have to have a certain EBAC percentage. And that's sort of, well, why are we doing that? We're doing that not to service the needs of the students. We're doing that to service the needs of the greater data god, whoever that data god is. So yes, I'm really glad to hear if Kyle would like to call in as well. My brother's actually called Kyle. It's another matter entirely. I think we've lost Adam. Since we've lost Adam, we'll respond to some of the questions I've got. Just about to sit down and to food, buddy, or I would. Oh, well, enjoy your food. Hopefully it's not a crisp sandwich, my friend. I've still got some Cheeto cheese and onion left over from my last trip home. The culinary delight it is. In fact, Kyle, both and I, coming from where we come from, would be interested to have that conversation of why is the Northern Irish, exam system so much better. Because I'm 29 years out of it, I may need a bit of a refresher. But it's interesting how there's a massive difference in the outcomes in Northern Ireland and Wales and Scotland. And that may need a bit of drilling into. The London Challenge 2003-2011 deals played a part in the current successes. We see the outcomes with disadvantaged children in the capital, generally London. This is interesting. Generally, comprehensive used a dire reputation back in the 1990s. London LC, London Challenge, provided an intensive support and resources to schools. I'd really be interested to hear about that deal. If you want to ring in and let me know about that, because that sounds like something that has helped create some cultural capital motivation, help create more positive outcomes. It might explain a little bit of the London bubble, so to speak, as well. So, Cassandra, I completely agree. Parents don't engage with their children. We've seen that. Parents even, yes, that's correct, Cassandra. They don't turn up the ones you need. Community involvement involves men. Yes, Amy's already said that, and that's up to date on the messages. So drilling into some of the numbers, and the numbers are important. Boys and girls. Now this is quite an interesting one. The gap between boys and girls has fallen, and we know that there's always been a gap between boys and girls at GCSEs. Piaget has it always been explained as a kind of maturation thing where boys' brain development, girls' brain development is a little bit different, and girls technically mature faster than boys. And at GCSE level, they haven't fully caught up. And by A level, I think it's right. Usually, it rights itself, and by degree level, it's gone the other way. There's normally that pattern. But of course, there was a lot put into raising boys' achievement. We used to have programs like that, raising boys' achievement at school, only to then raise the boys' achievement and then have to do a program about raising girls' achievement. And I'm not a big fan of that either, because I think it just should be raising achievement and looking at, it's the same as drilling into different subgroups. Kids don't always reflect, and there's always outliers, and there's always people that don't fit into those parameters. My best ever, one of my best ever students was predicted a level 4 and got a level 9. I had a student today who was predicted a level 5 and got a level 9. So you're kind of, people can break the cycle, and equally the big discussion about the SATs at primary school can also be misleading. When you see predictions, you see a child coming in with a prediction, and I'm not having a go at primaries. I know what they have to do at primaries are brilliant, and in fact, one of the things I often say at GCSE results day is this is the combination of 13 years of hard work, same as A levels. That's 14 years of hard work. Students just don't show up at secondary school. They've had years and years of dedication and hard work poured into them, not just by their parents, but by their primary school teachers. And it must be strange for the primary school teachers when they see the GCSE grades from some children popping up on Facebook. It's the same with me when I see my my degree, students getting their degrees out, and think, I wonder, do they still think, oh, what part did I play in that overall life journey of a child? I have them for GCSE, but then somebody takes them over for their T levels, their A levels, or their vocational qualifications, and then somebody else might take it over for that. But we form part of their story at a certain time, and it's often you don't always see the acknowledgement of the previous people that came before, and that's important to notice as well, that the impact you can have can be sometimes not taken into consideration. So that can happen as well. But the boys and girls gap has narrowed, which is interesting, and I'd like to know any takes on why that happened. My personal opinion on that is, I think terminal exams. I find terminal exams suit boys a bit more than suit girls. I'm making a general sweeping statement there that is open for interpretation and open for discussion, absolutely. But I find that some of the boys going into exam halls are a bit more laid back and blasé. I know that I had to pull some of my really high achieving girls in and say, look, sit down, have a cup of tea before the exam, have some chocolate, have some bananas, chill, calm, because they were going in almost as highly strung as a Stradivarius violin. They were just about to implode. And I know there is definitely some work being done on how people cope with exams and how they suit certain things. So I think the terminal nature of the end of leading up to an end exam may suit boys more than girls. That's why the gap is closed. Again, that's open too. interpretation. It's open to comment. It's open to anybody who's has anything different than that. If anyone wants to call in that one, more than thing. Tom HB said the third most popular subject this year was non-EBAC. That's true. Computing, I think, was that computing? I think computing was very, very popular. Economics is growing. Further maths is growing. Definitely shifting towards, I think, subjects that they're considered to be future subjects. The STEM subjects are growing as well. I think the most popular GCSE was the science, not actually maths. It was interesting to know there were more entries for science than there were maths. Don't again understand why that's the case, but that was the case, which is, I think, well, something in that, isn't there? There's got to be always something in that. So the boys versus the girls, the gap is definitely closed, and that's boys have narrowed the attainment gap slightly with a 19.1 achieving top grades compared to 24.9 for girls. So there's still girls out achieving boys, but the gap is getting narrower. 5.8 percentage points gap compared to 7.4 last year and 6.5 in 2019. So again, compared to 2019, where they're putting it back to their normal rates, the gap is slightly narrower. It's the narrowest lead enjoyed by the girls since 2009. So there could be something in that about resilience, or again, I'll put that out to the floor of why have the gap between the boys and the girls narrowed to their best boys performance since 2009. So there's some detail in that might be useful to understand. Going down to breaking down specific subjects, yes, maths remains the second most popular subject. Both business studies and statistics saw an increase in the number of people taking them as well. And I mentioned before about the increase in Chinese, Russian, and music actually had the largest percentage fall. And again, that might be staffing, the lack of, let's be honest, it doesn't help when you get members of the government saying we're not having people do Mickey Mouse degrees in arts and music and history and stuff like that. So it's interesting. The mood music seems to be Rishi Sunak's thing of extra maths. That does seem to be a sort of shift into, and it's no bad thing because we need to evolve. Society and subjects have always had to evolve, but there definitely does seem to be a preference now moving more towards, I think, the practical subjects in that sense. Right, differences in Northside. This is what Nick Gibbs said. He said, the attainment gap was narrowing, and from 2010, we got it down to 9.1, which is brilliant. And the pandemic then has caused that to go back. They've got £5 billion catch up. Now, the interesting thing is they suggest that the £5 billion is getting caught up, that we're getting back to normal. What I'm going to ask the floor is, do you think that this 5 billion, have you seen any of this £5 billion, is what I'm saying. Have you seen any of the impact of this £5 billion? Are they correct? Are things moving more in a positive direction? Or, as I feel, the gaps are getting bigger, attendance is getting lower, and the children who've got the cultural capital, the children who have got the rescuing factors, the children who have got more advantages, seem to be coping better than those who don't. And that's my feeling, and the evidence does support that. But the government are assuring us that, assuring the general public, that £5 billion has been spent. The Free Schools project that they've launched this week, they say that's going to address some of this. Do we think that is enough? Do we think that is going to solve this attainment gap from advantage to disadvantage? Do we think that we are seeing this positive impact of this £5 billion in school? Or are they just basically telling us one thing and the reality on the ground is something different? So more than happy for anybody to give me any thoughts and feelings on that. In the meantime, we have the ghost children. One story that dominated education last year was the ghost children. The data from the Department of Education shows the first term of the academic year, 125,000 children missed more school days than they attended. 90,000 secondary school students, 1 in 3, that's 36%, or more than double the rate in autumn 2019. So what are we doing with those, and why are they missing so much? Another statistic that came out was the top grades fall in private schools and a rise in state secondaries. So in England, the proportion of grades 7, which is an A grade, and above in independent schools dropped slightly on both 2019 and 2022. So in comparison, top grades achieved by students in state secondaries was slightly up. So top grades in private schools fall, state secondaries slightly up. However, the gap between school types remains wide. Just 19.1% of grades in state secondaries were 7 and above, compared with 46.6 in independent schools. So let me just say that again, it's nearly double. So just 19.1% of grades in state secondaries were 7 and above, compared with 46.6 in independent schools. Selective schools or grammar schools remain the highest achievers, which Adam mentioned earlier on, at 59.3% of grades. Completely seems unaffected. Now, here's my kicker to that. When somebody says to me, how did your school perform against the national average? Well, how am I to be judged in the national average when the national average contains independent and selective grammar schools? Surely I should be judged, if I am to be judged, on where I am nationally against ceteris paribus and all things being equal. I think, again, when you have that conversation and somebody says to you, oh, where is your subject nationally on average, and where's your school versus the national average? Great. That national average is skewed by 59.3% of grade 7 and above are grammar schools students. I know I've had a conversation recently with one of my senior members of staff because one of my exam papers, a very unusual little unit, I'm the only one of a handful of schools in the country that does it. And I'm not letting it go because I want to study Afghanistan and Iraq and 9/11, and the students love to study it too. But as she rightly pointed out to me and says, well, there's only a couple of hundred students in the country studying that unit, and should you be up against a grammar school or an independent schools who take that unit, then you are going to suffer. So I've had a conversation where I have to think about what I'm teaching and to choose a more popular option to ensure that, statistically speaking, I don't run the risk of competing against independent and grammar schools. That's me depriving my students of a unit that they want to study because I fear that I'm going to be judged, or my grade boundaries are going to be not as good. In other words, my results are going to dip, and the children's performance is going to dip if I choose the wrong unit. So that's what the impact that can have. It can change your curriculum based upon ensuring that you choose a popular option, so that, statistically speaking, you are less likely to run foul of a couple of schools which are, state grammars and independent schools. And that is a conversation I've had to have, and I've got to drill through my numbers to see whether that unit either adds to my overall pass rate or takes away. And at the moment, actually, I'm winning the argument because it is more significantly better. However, this is 1 year, and I may lose that argument because, which is, anyway. But I'm more than happy for you guys to any of the points I've made. Please call in. Please give me any of your opinions. I'm sure I've said something that's probably annoyed you. By all means, please do. I like a good discussion. These are the thoughts of a very tired and emotional Irishman who's trying to figure out, why is the education system in England not as good as it is in the other constituent parts of the United Kingdom? I still can't get over this. I can't get over the fact, first time in probably human recorded history, Northern Ireland is winning. Yay! Why? We won something fantastic. Apart from, Rory when he wins the golf, and maybe the rugby when we hopefully win that soon. But that's the thing. Yeah, that's good. So one of the things I touched upon as well was stratification, and Max Weber, who talks about high correlation of social stratification. According to Weber, the higher your socioeconomic status, the better your life chances. Educators are one of the most important predictors of people's life chances. Better educated people are more likely to work and tend to earn more. At the age of 40, the median university graduate earns roughly 80% more than the median non-graduate. How the growth of higher education is disproportionately benefit those from disadvantaged backgrounds. The 10 years after GCSEs, over 70% of those who went to a private school and graduated from university, compared with just under half of those from the richest fifth of the families from state schools, and fewer than 20% of those from the poorest fifth of families. So you see what happens after GCSEs, which is of course always interesting when you see where your students go and what they do and what they become, and what journey they take. Already you can see that there is a clear path for the successful GCSE students. You have the conversation. You can already see, well, I've got a level 9 in maths and physics and biology and chemistry. What are you going to study? Well, I'm going to a sixth form to study. And you hear statistics, maths, and you know the conversations. And then you see others going, well, what are you going to do now? I don't know. What did you need to get into college? Don't know. There are some students just falling through the cracks. And I think, again, bad advice, not a clear path. The number of NEET has increased, along with the number of people who are not attending school. The T levels don't seem to be fully worked out yet. So the non-academic path route doesn't look as clear, and it doesn't look as if it is as clear as it should be. Now, according to sixth forms, colleges' sixth forms are going to lower their expectations and their entry rates this time for this year, and that mirrors a little bit of what we saw with universities, saying, everybody get a university place this year. We'll get you all sorted. If you want to go to university, there's some university course out there. That was the kind of general conversation that was had last week with A levels. That does seem to be a similar sort of take on what colleges are saying, that they will take students. However, some colleges will only take certain students for certain subjects if they have a grade boundary, and that brings you to this, where your life could be a sliding doors scenario, where I have 3 students who are missing out on their history grades by 1 mark. And that missing out on 1 mark, as one student said to me today, they need a 6 to study that at their college for A level. Now, I'm happy with that student being good enough, even though the exam grade they've got is a 5 at the moment. I'd take the risk on A level, because where they started to where they're going, they've got all the attributes, the skills that they need. They will, for want of a better word, to use an athlete in vernacular, they are an up and coming athlete. They are a wonder kid. They will increase, I think, their academic ability as they get older. And my instinct of 20 years says that they have all the ingredients they're going to need. However, at the moment, they are at the stage where there is 1 mark potentially preventing them from taking what they want to do at A level. Now, they may then take a different subject at A level, which might send them off on a completely different career path, and that may change the outcome of their life. I know this actually happened to me. I got 7 GCSEs. I could resit 7 GCSEs in secondary school in Northern Ireland. I passed them, and if I hadn't have got those 7 GCSEs, I wouldn't have went to the grammar school. And if I didn't go to the grammar school, I wouldn't have come across one of the most amazing teachers, Dr. A.D. McDonald, who taught me history and politics, and he took the rough diamond that I was, who didn't know what a paragraph was, and he taught me how to use a full stop. Now, that changed my outcome. That, without a shadow of a doubt, that's one of the reasons I got to university, was going to that grammar school, and that gave me the confidence to do all the things in the rest of my life. Now, if I hadn't have got all of my GCSEs, I wouldn't have got into that stage, and then I wouldn't be having this conversation now. I'd be living in a different place, possibly a completely different version of me. Who's to say that I may not have worked out in the end? And some people do, in a roundabout way, sometimes take a long journey around in education to success. But at the same time, is playing God with the outcomes of student futures based upon an exam system, as we know, is not fundamentally 100% airtight. It's not fair. And I seen the grade boundaries being shifted down in A levels, and today I looked at my grade boundaries of 15 marks for a difference. And I know that my maths colleague was telling me that in the grade boundary between 4 and 5, there was, I think, 23 marks difference year on year, which means that it's going to lead to more students potentially missing out on their choice of place. But also there is the knock-on effect of the confidence that may erode from them. They may say, I'm not good enough, and then they may change their outcome. They may then say, hit their confidence. I'm not going to do that now. I'm not good enough for that. So this is life defining, and I know that because at 11 years old I sat an exam called the 11 plus. And that changed the outcomes for some of my friends. It sent some of my friends to a grammar school. It sent some of my friends to a secondary school. And I always felt it was too young to decipher the successful from not. And I also know that some of us who went to secondary schools felt like failures. And I know that's one of the conversations that you often hear in results day of like, I failed. And as one of the children said to me and came to me, I've let you down, sir, I failed. And I had to look and go, no, you haven't. Don't worry about it. Don't worry, you haven't failed. The fact you sat the exam, and I had to sort of reevaluate and go, no, you didn't fail. But how many children today, how many are going to fail? And it must be the most horriblest thing. And I always remember my best friend, when he got his GCSEs, he didn't get a single GCSE. He didn't get a single GCSE. He was diagnosed at the age of 23 with dyslexia, a severe form of dyslexia. And he went to university at 24. He got a first-class honours degree. And his journey is one of those that always reminds me that he overrid that. He repeated his English 3 times, repeated his maths twice, but he was so determined to get it. But I never forget on that day when we were all smiling and getting our exam results, he was broken, absolutely broken. And it is really, really, really difficult to lift people back up when they feel like they're not worth. And I think that becomes the self-fulfilling prophecy for some individuals. Their exam results mirrors in some ways their possible feelings about how they feel. So a lot to discuss there. If anybody would like to, more than happy for you to have a little chat, call in on any of those. Tell me your story of today. If anybody's got any brilliant stories, any fantastic sort of good feel good stories. Give me a feel good one. Give me one where somebody has done something amazing. I had a couple of days myself, where you just think, wow, that kid has overcome adversity, and I think that's why we do it. So if you've any of those stories today, I'm more than happy for you to think. I'm just looking through any of our comments. The irony of GCSE kids having to learn a stratification unit, knowing Weber inside out. Mr. Kelly. I like that. That's really, really good. So kids are learning about stratification and social statistics while actually being part of those social statistics. But isn't that self-awareness? That's the same thing with myself. I was aware of the poverty levels around me when I was a young person, and knowing the statistics, and even knowing that awareness of what you're up against actually can unlock within the students that kind of reality of why they have to work. I mean, it's always a good thing when you sort of have to sit them down and say, I do that in my area. You're working against. Come on, fight the system. You are not being given the same advantages. Do you know that? And it is interesting when you have those conversations that the children don't see the world that way. They don't understand the bigger game that goes on. I mean, a lot of parents don't understand that predicted grades are sometimes calculated from what? Their income, their postcode. I mean, insurance, everything now is algorithmed, isn't it? Everything's algorithmed. How much how much you pay for your house stroke is just sometimes determined by how good the educational results. I mean, there you go. Your GCSE results can influence the price of your property. True. They actually build it into the estate agents. And you know that with primary schools. Oh, yeah, it's even more so with primary schools. A good primary school can increase the property value. But what judges the good primary school? Oh, okay, what's its SATs results? Okay, what's its Ofsted? What judges a good secondary school? Today, the newspapers are going to be full of, the good looks, the good stories, the smiling student, and how much more. I notice that in the news now, are schools putting into, here's our results, here's our success, come to our school. It's marketization, it's a business, isn't it? But here's the unwritten rule and the horrible thing to admit. The system does it have to have winners and losers? In order for you to do well against your cohort, people have to lose out. That's a horrible thing to say, but it's true, isn't it? In order for some people to have success, others have to lose out. There has to be a percentage of 9s and 8s and 7s and 6s and 5s and 4s. So you're almost saying to some students, oh, well, there you go. And we don't even realize we do it. We go higher ability, lower. We used to do that, higher ability, lower ability, middle ability. And even when I'm drilling through this data, I'm going, oh, here's my high ability student. They've got, I go, stop, whoa. There I'm doing that. That's completely contradictory to the likes of Carol Dweck. We're almost saying, same as a school, that's a good school. Why is it a good school? They get good results. So the data tells you that. So what about the rest? What about the community? What about all the soft skills that they do? What about the happiness of the children? What about the happiness of the children? There's no point in children getting straight nines, and you've caused them a mental health crisis to get those grades. Is that really worth the price to be paid? Is that what we are? But like football managers winning the league, we have to win the league every year. If you're not winning the league, then you're not a good manager. They said that was about. We are there to produce outcomes. We're there to produce the grades. Was that how I'm judged? Today that's what I felt my worth was. What's my residual? Oh, what student? And I have these horrible thoughts. What student has pulled my grade averages down? Oh, and I've had that. Oh, what primary school has given me that child's grade that I have to then inherit? Oh, and I had one today where they were predicted a level 7. The highest grade they got was a 2. And what do you do with that? It's -5. And I'm like, okay. So when I'm having the conversation with my performance management and I look at my data, which you shouldn't take into account, but people still do. You're not meant to, but they do, don't they? You're judged. And then you look down the league tables, don't you? You go, where is my subject in comparison to the rest of the school? Where am I? Am I red? Am I purple? Am I green? Am I going to be one of those that's going to have those awkward conversations of what happened? Or am I going to be one of those, same in a school? Or in school, are there some subjects that do well, but do they do well because they are pushier, they hog all the homework, they have more resources, they have more kudos? So in school, you get winners and losers. In the exam system, you get winners and losers. We know this. But we buy into it then, and we kind of like we talk about our kids do well. Tom alluded earlier on, kids do well. You go, these are the kids, my kids' results. The first thing my wife wants to know, how did the kids do? And I'm going, yeah, I did. And I'm like, whoa, not I, them. No, not my results, their results. But we are quick to be criticized for their results, but we're also quick to go, oh, my kids did well. And it's a really, really strange one. I find myself contradicted sometimes, and find myself being contradictory because I want the kids to do well. I want them to get the grades, but there's part of me thinking, how far do I have to go to get these kids over the line, and how far do I have to push? And I remember that I knew what type of teacher I was about 7 years ago when one of my colleagues turned around back in the days when there was resets and modular GCSEs. And I had a student come to me saying, sir, I've got a B grade, an A grade, sorry, I've got an A grade. And the head of a subject wanted to put that student in for a reset based upon the fact that their predicted was an A star. And the kid was looking at me going, sir, I am happy with that A grade. And, I'm like, in what universe is a child getting an A grade not good enough? And I knew that's where we were going. I knew that's where education was going. When somebody was being put in for a reset to get an A star because the predicted grade was an A star because that didn't look good in a data spreadsheet. And I can't tell you that I did not hold back on how I felt with my colleague at that time. I'm not going to be unprofessional and say who it was, when it was, etc. I'm going to say that I pretty much told them to back off. And they'd gone to the parents and said to the parents, oh, you want the best for your child. Child wants the best. They want an A star. They didn't ask the child. The child didn't want to do and equally, while I was involved, I was the child's tutor. And they came to me saying I'm being put under a huge amount of pressure. And I felt that member of staff was only interested in his grades, only interested in what the students do in his class, and only interested in his results because it's important to him, because then he's doing his job. And I had to say to him, if I behaved the way you did, and every single member of staff, all the 12 or 13 teachers who have that child, what do you think that's going to do to that child if we're all just coming out and go, you must do my revision, you must do my... and that's the one thing we forget about. Some children just basically cannot cope with the huge amount of volume content and the current GCSE system, which I don't think is fair. But you're more than welcome to disagree, more than welcome to have Tell me what you think. But these are my random thoughts. What made me cry today, Mr. Kelly again? A kid I solidly predicted a 2, but always was used to positive praise to the hill to secure the 4. Oh yes! Oh, tell me about that, please. Ring in and tell me about that. Email from the kid said, "You still wanted me to get that pass, and you always believed in me. That's why we do it." That, yeah, yeah, that's what it is, isn't it? And you go, whether you got that kid over the line or not, the fact that you've left that impression, and yet that is only, here's the thing, that is only a 4, isn't it? That is only a 4. It's not a 9 or an 8 or a 7. That's a 4. It's a scraping a pass. But the fact of the matter is that could be the catalyst to that child feeling as if somebody believed in me. I got that. And that could be life defining. You don't know the impact that could have. And equally on your own, look what that's done to you. That is, that is that moment, isn't it? That is that moment that defines us. Is this is why I do this. This is why it's important. This is why we fight for every child. This is why you don't say I'm only teaching certain children, because that outcome does have huge implications, and when you do get those, they keep you in it. They keep you so in it. And I had 3 of those today where it was, one student came to me and says, "I thought I messed up the exam," and they had a right go at me. They literally tore strips off me on the morning of the exam. "I'm not prepared. You haven't taught us this. You haven't taught us that." They literally tore strips off me, and I took it because I thought, "Oh, maybe I have, maybe I haven't, maybe I haven't." So, senior of the exam, first things moment, went, I did it. And I looked at her straight in the face and said, "I told you, please do me one favor. Stop destroying yourself like this. You are amazing." And she looked back and she went, "I believe it now. I believe it now." And I'm thinking, what, you didn't believe it before? What do you think I've been saying to you for 2 years? You're absolutely brilliant. You were better than I was at your age. Come on. And it's only that the exam results helped validate, but it's the fact that I had to take a lot of emotional pounding from the student to literally convince them of their own worth. And even with me saying, "Come on, well, they had to see." And that's the good thing about the results for some. It is validation. It is the kind of, I deserve more, I am worth more, I have worked hard for this. And there's nothing better feeling when you know that some students have worked really, really hard, and you open their results and you think, you deserve that, you've earned that, and that's you've done that. And you get parents saying, "Well, thank you for what you've done." You go, "Well, you're the one reading the bedtime story when they were 2 and 3 years old. You're the one that took them to museums. You're the one that that made them sit down." I said that to one mother. It's like, "How much have you been through?" She's like, "Oh, tell me about it." And some parents go through, because their kids, they have to really fight hard, tooth and nail, to get the children to study and revise. It's a really demanding thing and a lot of people or parents will tell you that. It's a real emotional roller coaster they go through, because if you push the kid too hard, they react the other way. If you have to be very tolerant and understanding in the mood swings and with the brain. The fact that they're going through the teenage rewiring of the brain from age 14, and we're forcing them into these exams. No wonder it's an emotional roller coaster. It's an emotional roller coaster for me, and I'm a mature guy, so God knows what they're feeling. So, but that's an amazing story. Thank you for that, Mr. Kelly. That's absolutely exactly why we do that. When you get that one, doesn't it? That one that you just, yeah, I've done my job there. That is, for want of a better word, priceless. The data won't tell that story. The spreadsheet won't do that. What does that is that child's memory will be of that teacher who made a difference, who got them over the line. It's the X factor. Is Tom asked that question the other night, isn't it? How much difference can a teacher make? Sometimes, to some students, we make a massive difference. To others, we don't have to be there. I mean, one of my students got to level 9, was honest with me and said, "She didn't need me." Basically, she used me for in-depth and intellectual conversations. We were having lots of discussions about the trans issue recently because, was way off the history curriculum. She didn't need me. She just basically enjoyed my adult company, basically, because she's more mature than I am in some ways. She's gone over to Cambridge and Oxford. She's a very mature young lady and knows exactly what she's doing. So what difference did I make to her level 9? Not really. I know I didn't. But I know that she'll look fondly back on some of the deeper things that I asked, some of the bigger questions I asked, some of softer skills I may have headed towards. So you don't always make as big a difference, but you're there and you're providing that service as a teacher, because that's what we're here to do. We provide a service, don't we? And it's a selfless service. And it's a service that is emotionally tiring. And I'm going to speak to our sponsors, and then hopefully I'm going to sit down and rest. So our sponsors are Pearson's Modern Foreign Language 2024. They are rooted in new communication of up-to-date knowledge, and that is fantastic for our young people, especially since languages are growing. And as one student said to me, I'm learning languages to get out of here, Mr. Poland. So I think they're really, really important. One of my greatest regrets is not taking a language beyond GCSE. I have French at GCSE, which I got to use 2 weeks ago when I was on holiday at in France. And interestingly, French with an Irish accent still sounds like French with an Irish accent. So, bonjour still sounds with an Irish guy speaking French. I always find that funny that people don't realize that whatever accent in English you have, when you're learning a foreign language, you carry that accent. So it'll be interesting to know if Pearson's Modern Foreign Languages have Scouse, Brummie, and also all the other brilliant dialects of these islands. I love the dialects and I love the accents of these islands, and some of them are absolutely brilliant. So yeah, hopefully Pearson's Modern Foreign Languages do Pearson's French. When they teach English in France, I wonder what accent do they do? Do they do the assured, pronounced? I suppose it's the same with like the English textbooks in France. Do they have what do they have as cartoons? Do they have people in red, white, and blue, towels? Do they have like football guys? I just would love to see a French textbook which is teaching them English in the same way that our old French textbooks used to have Gaston with a beret, onions around his neck, and a cigarette hanging out. I never understood why that, and I never will, that for life of me, understand why my old French GCSE was directing me to go left at the horse butchers. But Pearson's Modern Foreign Languages is very different. It is rooted in the modern, not in the past, and that is ready to go in 2024. So that's Pearson's MFL. So thanks for listening tonight, and thanks for the contributions. And if you are a GCSE teacher today, just remember exactly what I started with, and this is how I'll finish it today. And this is, we all know many of you have been feeling nervous, and you don't deserve to feel like this. Many of you had trouble sleeping the night before. Yeah, congratulations, you got what you wanted. But if you didn't, please try not to worry. Whatever the grades your students got, you are worth a million times more. I'm proud to be a teacher, proud to be a Teachers Talk radio host. Please come and join us. We have plenty of room for other individuals to come and join the roster. Always looking for new talent. It's good fun, good crack, and it's really good CPD as well. And it's always very interesting. So please bear that in mind as well. You can also listen back to any of our podcasts on Podbean and on the Twitter Spaces. And some really good ones out there as well. Monday nights was an absolute stonker. I'm going to download that and listen to that as well. And please, again, listen out for any of our other future spaces coming up. We'll be back next Thursday night, where we'll do probably the outcomes of some of these things, what comes out in the wash. We'll have probably a bit more analysis of what comes out about the GCSEs, because it's still a bit raw, and I'm still processing some of the data to try and figure out where the chips lie. So they were just sort of the top end stuff about the boys and the girls and the regional variations. I still think there's definitely more to come out about, where we're going, what we're doing. And considering this is educational week in the government, they're going to have an educational week every couple of weeks. I think we're gearing up towards a general election, and hopefully education will be more discussed, and hopefully that will produce what I hope is more evidence-based policy, which can help us, those of us who are fully committed to changing the outcomes, like Mr. Kelly, who's just made my evening with that story, by the way, trying to change the outcomes of the young people we care so much about. So take care, and you've been wonderful. Thank you, my friends. Good night.